I'm Whitney Morean, and I'm a rehab psychology fellow at the University of Washington. Thank you so much for joining tonight's forum that will be a panel discussion. Tonight, I'm joined by two folks that have acquired disabilities, and our hope is to have a discussion about ableism after acquiring a disability. I really got into this topic after I acquired a disability in my late 20s after a brain injury, and have really wanted to study this and work with folks to better understand how to kind of cope with the reality of that we live in a world that treats people with disabilities very differently than people without disabilities. And that can be a pretty lonely and confusing thing, especially after newly acquired disabilities. And so my hope is really to have a discussion around some of the things that these women have kind of learned to how they've coped with some of the challenges that have come up for them. Similar to how sexism is prejudiced against women, ableism is really prejudiced against people with disabilities, regardless of the type of disability, and can be both explicit comments as well as kind of implicit behaviors that people might be doing. And so we'll kind of talk about the variety and how that can look different in different settings and how you might respond and how to kind of cope in the long term. Our hope is also that people in the audience will ask questions and we'll be able to engage in a little bit of a discussion towards the end. To start off, I'm going to ask the two panelists to introduce themselves, including their name, level of injury, and how long it's been since they were injured. So we'll start with you, Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Boswinka. I have been injured for 15 years. I'm a level C6 incomplete with a central cord syndrome.
And my name is Shannon Timon, and I have been injured for 10 years. I am a C5 complete.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for being willing to participate. I think one of the things that we talked a little bit about in terms of introduction is maybe just tell us a little bit more about like who you are, who are the people in your life, maybe what you do, to just kind of contextualize maybe some of the conversations we'll be having about how to navigate life after a spinal cord injury. We'll start with you, Michelle, again.
I'm a parent. At the time of my accident, my kids were 4 and 6. So they were quite small at the time. My husband suffered a traumatic brain injury in the same accident. I have a long career in tech. I'm married for a good long time now. And yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And I work in academia, and I live independently with the help of caregivers and my cat.
Wonderful. Well, again, I want to thank you both so much. This is a topic that, again, I didn't really even know needed to be talked about until I became disabled. We kind of understand sexism, I think, as a culture, and there's a similar ism that exists in terms of prejudice and discrimination, both overt as well as kind of covert or implicit, that exists towards people with disabilities that, again, I didn't even know existed until myself I became disabled. So the first type of ableist microaggressions is really this idea of that people with disabilities are treated as helpless. So this can be things like people don't expect me to have a job, or maybe they express pity for me because I have a disability. Or even the inverse, people express admiration simply because I'm getting out of the house because I have a disability. I'm curious if there's an example of an interaction with either a stranger, a medical professional, a coworker, a family or friend that really reinforced this idea of the stereotype that people with disabilities are helpless, that you, again, feel comfortable sharing, and maybe how you responded to that situation. Shannon, do you want to start?
Sure. I can think of so many examples. I'll say particularly in the years right after my injury, I had more caregivers than I could count, and I would have caregivers come in and make comments about my clothing choice, suggesting I should just wear sweatpants. I had one caregiver come in wearing an apron, and she said, well, and you don't have to get out of bed at all today. So just these assumptions that that would be my preference, and that because of my disability, I wouldn't be doing things. But, I think in answer to your question too, I'm always surprised when someone I'm well acquainted with makes assumptions about my ability. And just a few months ago, I was out with some friends and we were going to dinner and a play, and it was in the International District and we didn't want to park twice. And a friend of mine, one of the friends who was with me, said, "Oh, well, you weren't going to be able to get from the restaurant to the theater, though." And I have this excellent wheelchair that can go 25 plus miles a day. So just some lack of understanding, mostly based in ignorance about the capacities that I do have, even if it's with the help of equipment.
Do you feel like your response has changed over time?
Definitely. Yeah, I think I used to get more emotional and really feel like I wanted people to understand and explain to them. And I don't think I have as much patience with people anymore. And if I just don't feel like engaging, it's much easier for me just to roll away, so to speak, and let it go. Not every moment needs to be a teaching moment.
I think that, I imagine that will be a theme we'll probably circle back to multiple times this evening, because that, I feel like, is something I still feel I struggle with, is I want to help teach everybody, and if we teach everybody, we can't just live our lives. I'm curious for you, if you, same question.
I find people like super willing to help. So it's I noticed right after the injury how very kind and how very helpful people would be, the kindness of strangers and the kindness of friends and family. And so on that side, I really, really appreciated it. And there are some days and some things that I really need help with that maybe people don't know I need help with. And so that's kind of strange, not strange, but, that's something you face. Like, well, I can't do that so well. Maybe I can't make it to that restaurant because maybe if I made it there, I couldn't actually get in because the tables are too close together, right? So there's that helpless, and then there's or I am doing something. Maybe I'm helping make dinner, or maybe I want to go on maybe an adventure that friends and family are going on, and they're, well, you probably can't go because, you probably wouldn't be able to do it. And so sometimes I feel like even the most kind people think, well, maybe I'm not able to do it when maybe I'd really like to. So I feel sometimes it limits me, I think.
Yeah, I'm kind of hearing this theme of, from both of you, this idea of even people that are close with you not necessarily fully understanding, and so just the value of open conversation around helping everybody understand what the situation is, so that then you both can actually make an informed decision of, can I do that? Or maybe I can, but I don't feel like it, or I do want to try figuring it out, or the additional work that's needed to, again, kind of do the research to make sure that the place is actually accessible, that you're going.
One misunderstanding that I get all the time, I wonder if this happens to you, Michelle, is people will say, well, your wheelchair, you won't be able to get in, your wheelchair won't fit through the door, which is just a misunderstanding that my wheelchair fits through all regular size doors. But I can't tell you how many times I've been told that.
So it's the assumption that it's just people assume that wheelchairs are bigger?
Yes.
Okay.
I regularly get that comment.
Maybe they've seen me drive. Yes. Even though my wheelchair gets through a standard door, I do scrape from time to time.
You're giving us all a bad reputation.
I'm sorry.
I'm curious if either of you feel like there are similarities in terms of how you were treated as women in terms of kind of sexism, and now your experience of living with a disability in terms of ableism. And if you'd be willing to share any of those reflections.
I think when I was a young girl, a teenager coming up, I didn't, well, as a small kid, I think I was taught, but as I grew older, I was like, well, there's not really sexism in the workplace. There's not sexism. That's a thing from past generations. And I guess because I was swimming in it. But after years, then I started to be able to see it, right, more and more, and be able to see it for what it is, and maybe not internalize it. And I noticed the same thing with an acquired injury. So I might, even when we talked about having this talk, I was like, oh, is that a thing? Is ableism a thing? And I really thought about it since our initial discussions. And yeah, by putting a name on it, it makes me actually be able to see, oh, those things that I thought were me, you know, that I'm not competent. Oh, no. Often people are viewed as maybe not competent. Oh, I'm being disregarded because I'm not valuable. Oh, people with disabilities are often seen as not valuable. So by putting a name on it now helps me think, oh, that's actually not inherent in my, you know, in my humanity. It's more of, you know, the situation I'm in.
Yeah, it's
So
the
it's
result
helped.
of our cultural
Yeah.
view of disability as opposed to what you're bringing to it. Yeah. I noticed for myself, the label of understanding that ableism and ableist microaggressions were a thing helped me realize that it wasn't about me.
Yeah.
Like, I thought maybe I was just doing disabled wrong.
Yeah.
Like, maybe I was just a bad disabled person because people were constantly asking me questions or feeling the need to do things that I could very clearly do on my own. And it just helped me understand, like, oh, this is a manifestation of how society views people with disability. That doesn't mean that it doesn't always hurt my feelings, but it helped me begin to see that it isn't really about me or even this individual interaction, but it's really about kind of society's view. And again, I think back of like, I definitely understood that sexism was a thing, but until I acquired a disability, I didn't really understand how we treated people with disabilities as really less than fully human.
I've definitely had that experience, particularly because I work. And just the surprise and the, oh, you know, good for you. Oh, you know, getting out of the house and, oh, what do you, oh, you have a job. I actually have a PhD, and I had an incident very, very recently. I teach with two other individuals. Two of us are women and one is a man. And I had a student, I teach online, so my students are not necessarily aware of my disability, but in terms of sexism, we all received an email, and the two females were referred to by our first name, and the male was referred to as Dr. So-and-so.
Oh, wow.
Which is just a reminder that, you know, sexism is not dead. And so it's a very similar experience. I would say, oh, you know, as a woman, I get less respect, and as someone with a disability who works, it's always that level of sort of genuine surprise.
Yeah.
So the second type of ableist microaggression is this kind of comments or behaviors that kind of minimize your disability, or kind of suggest the idea that people with disabilities may be kind of over-exaggerating their disability. Is there an example that you've had with either like a stranger or a medical professional where you felt like they either explicitly or implicitly kind of minimize your disability that, again, you feel comfortable sharing?
I'm thinking now of a case with encountering a lawyer who's talking to me, and just the way they were questioning me about, you were in PT, you did this set of exercises, you were there for an hour, you were there for an hour and a half. And I really remember thinking, well, I don't know if that's exactly meant. Yeah, they're thinking, well, you could do all that so you're not injured, right? But to do all that, you do all that so that you get the most out of your body, right? So that was just a case of maybe it's just the way the lawyers were working, but they just felt like they were minimizing my injury.
Yeah, it seems like people cannot necessarily understand that, like, well, I can do some things, but the amount of effort and energy it takes to do those after disability is different. That doesn't mean I'm not disabled, and I might need accommodations to be able to get those things done, but I still can do them. And it also might mean that I'm not able to do anything for the rest of the day.
I find that sometimes I minimize, right? I minimize because I'm not that disabled. You know, if I just tried harder, if I ate better, if I exercised more, I'd have more energy. It's not that bad.
Mhm.
What a faker or hypochondriac. Just I feel like that. And then I'm thinking, well, no, that's not exactly true, right? So I turned it in on myself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I was thinking about that actually in relation
Mm-hmm.
to this question because I think, particularly because I can't move my hands, my level of disability is high enough that I think people, see that right away. It's very physical, outward.
Mm-hmm.
But particularly, I think right after my accident, I was really trying to prove to myself that I could do everything I used to do. And, to a certain degree, that's somewhat true. But I think I've also gotten to a place now 10 years later where I've realized, hey, if that's going to be really hard for me and I'm going to get really frustrated doing that, then I want help with that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't want to have to try and force myself to do it just to prove that I can do it independently.
Yeah.
But that took me a long time to get to. And I think that's internalized ableism for sure. I've also, something interesting I've noticed that I'll get asked a lot. So I have morning caregivers and evening caregivers. Sometimes, like a friend will be over and it'll be like a Tuesday and they'll just say like, oh, well, do you have a caregiver tonight? As if like on Tuesdays I can just all of a sudden like get myself into bed like magically. Which, I think is just a process of people learning, but it is a little bit of like, just a lack of understanding around the regularity of help that you do need.
There's not like an off switch where you're like all of a sudden not needing that level of assistance.
Exactly.
Yeah. I'm curious kind of when you encounter these either internal minimizations that it sounds like both of you have experienced and I definitely have of like, but I could, again, this kind of like I could just be trying harder. Mm-hmm. What are strategies that you've come up with to kind of cope with that unhelpful self-talk? I ask for the group as well as for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, it's kind of acceptance in a way, comes with time, and then again not. Remembering like things that my OT would say, or now my 85-year-old mom, you can do one activity a day, right? If you do like 2 or 3, even coming out in the evening at 7 p.m., that's like an activity.
Yeah.
That's a big activity that will affect me tomorrow, no doubt. So just remember thinking, okay, you have to budget your time, and by budgeting your time, you'll get more out of it. And it's okay to take a nap. You're not lazy for taking naps. You're going to feel better when you get up. So I don't know, just listening to the things that my OT was telling me early on when I wasn't ready to listen, and hearing them now and taking them to heart now without guilt, without I'm really thinking I'm being lazy. Yeah.
I think for me it's gotten easier over time, and also as my friends have been aging around me, it's been easier to accept that everybody has limitations, and seeing that everyone's limitations differ based on their situation. Which has really helped me kind of take a step back. And, oddly enough, I think COVID was really helpful too, because a lot of people were in the position of not being able to do things, but it slowing down the whole world made it a lot easier to sort of recognize where I was pushing myself and where I wasn't gaining something from it. And so it's a lot easier now for me to say, I could do that, but the stress and anxiety or effort that it's going to take just isn't worth it.
I'm curious if you have felt this within the disability community, especially given varying levels of spinal cord injury in terms of functional status, of feeling like either others are minimizing you or maybe providers are minimizing you. I feel like one of the things that I sometimes hear from folks is that like they get compared to people with higher levels of injury, and so like, well, you're okay, you're only at this level, you shouldn't be that frustrated. Or I guess I'm just curious from either of you if you feel like you hear from other people or with either within the community or with medical providers, again, kind of this minimization.
I don't know if this quite counts or not in this category, but it feels adjacent at least. I dated a guy for a while, and I remember he said to me at one point, well, I just really like the way you don't act like you should be treated like you're disabled. And it really took me, I don't think I've totally unpacked that statement yet, but it really like struck me like, what does that mean to be treated like, to act like you should be treated like you're disabled? It just felt very, like clearly there's an expectation of how disabled people should be acting. And that was, it was really uncomfortable. And you know, I think it was his ableism, right? Thinking that if you're disabled, you should act more disabled, whatever that means.
Yeah, this assumption around what being disabled and how you interact with the world is going to look like.
Which, yeah, left a really bad taste in my mouth.
Understandably.
Yeah. I felt that a little bit at during inpatient and outpatient rehab. Like in inpatient rehab, I don't know, again, this is my own comparison. There were people in all sorts of states, right? Is it better not to have your hands or not to have your legs? I don't know.
Do I have to choose?
Do I have to choose? Is there, because my legs work better than, you know, like, just like, and am I really disabled? Am I disabled enough? Am I a good disabled person? All those questions. I don't feel like in the disabled community, folks have ever said anything to me, but I always judge, you know, think, oh, you know, because I can walk, then I didn't come to this forum forever. Because I'm like, okay, it's not really for me, and I feel that people would be like, well, you're not all that disabled. And so, yeah, I guess it's, again, like, it's my own internalized ableism. But I also felt it at the, you know, like in outpatient PT, they'd be like, well, you know, you're walking pretty good, or you're doing things pretty well, but the amount of potential I was leaving on the table was immense. And so I didn't want them to you know, give up on me. You know, so I keep doing my PT regardless now, and I have gained over the years. So yeah, I felt like that answered the question.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate it. I think you both spoke to different aspects of this idea of minimization. I, you know, really resonate with what you just said, this idea of I'm functional enough for PT to be like, you're fine. It's like, right, sure, I'm fine. And I'd like to not, like you said, not leave recovery on the table. I want to keep pushing myself. And I do think that there's also a balance of like also living a life. Because I think, you know, I early on was like so hyper focused on recovery, and I was in a position to be able to spend a lot of time and energy on that, and recognized that also took up all of my energy for the day. And so how to balance that with like then also living a life that's not solely focused on recovery. And so balancing this kind of minimization of like, no, I do need things, and also I have made a lot of gains. The third type of kind of ableist microaggression is this idea of denial of personhood. Really kind of what you were just describing, Shannon, this idea where people kind of essentialize disability as your kind of whole identity. People act as if I'm nothing more than my disability. Is there an example, you know, maybe an additional or other one, where maybe with a stranger or a medical professional, where they really only saw the disability and didn't see you as a whole person?
I, again, could come up with lots of examples of this, but I think the one that comes to mind most powerfully was I have a very good friend, and we've known each other for decades now, and we talk frequently, and I know she's heard a lot about my experience through the years, and I went and visited her last year, and I remember at some point she turned to me, and it was an interaction where a stranger at a museum or a restaurant spoke to her instead of to me about my needs. Like which table would be best for her, right? And at the end of a couple of days together, my friend said to me, she said, you had told me about this happening to you, but I had no idea the frequency with which it occurred. She's like, it really felt different, and I didn't expect it. And so hearing this from her perspective and her reflection, because at this point I definitely noticed it, but it doesn't have the same impact on me, and it really meant a lot that she noticed and that she was really reflective about it.
Yeah. I'm curious, Shannon, before we get to Michelle to answer this same question, what do you think has changed so that it doesn't kind of stick to you the same way it sounds like it did early on?
I think it's just less of a touchy subject for me, and instead of taking it personally, I just respond to the person, and it doesn't feel worth my energy to get upset because it happens so frequently. So I will just answer questions about me and look directly at the person and encourage them to speak to me. But again, it's kind of a teaching moment no matter what, but I also don't want to waste my emotional energy on that, and I've learned that over time.
Thank you. How about for you?
I can think of early on in the hospital when people would come in the morning to take care of me, wash me, etc. I would feel, partly I would just want to disappear into myself and disassociate and not be there, so you could just take care of this body because I'm not here. Right? But sometimes that felt like they didn't see me, they just saw this disabled body. Or in the airport when getting on and off a plane, sometimes I feel just like a bag of potatoes, right? I'm in the chair, they push me, they never talk to me. And now, what I do, well, I'll just engage. Hey, how's your day? What are you doing? Just talk to them, talk to whoever's helping me through the airport about whatever we want to talk about. Because otherwise it can just be I don't know, I'm not there, right? I'm just my disability. And most horrifically, I've learned, in situations like during World War II, during the Holocaust, that people with disabilities were considered not essential at all. And that is, for me, is a horrific thought. If you're suddenly disabled, then it's not worth living. That's you're just your disability, and you're not meant to be here. So those kind of there's a whole range in there. It's terrifying.
I'm curious if there are strategies that you do to help people see you as a whole person, to kind of counteract this tendency of our culture to really fixate on the disability, as opposed to both of you being fully formed, all of us being fully formed people that happen to have disabilities. But are there things that you do to try to help compensate for this bias that we know that can exist, where people really hyper-focus on the disability?
Much like you were saying, I think I try to engage people in conversation and just sort of small talk to get them more comfortable. I think it's a lot of times it's just people are uncomfortable with things that they don't understand. And sometimes I think it's also that people are concerned that they might be asked to help in some way, and maybe they're uncomfortable with that, or maybe they don't know what that would look like. And so I just try to break the ice. I think the airport is a good example, and just chat about, just to make it clear that we're both human, and I don't know anything about them, and they don't need to make assumptions about me.
sometimes I just try to choose when to disclose.
Mm.
So I'll maybe like to meet people over Zoom, over some kind of meeting like that, and let people get to know me that way and interact. So after we've got a relationship, then and I'm talking about working at the moment, and they then come see me in person, and they're like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. Oh, that's Michelle, who also uses a wheelchair, has a disability, versus if I go into, say, a conference room, first I probably hit the door. And I feel like people see my chair and my disability first, and then no matter what I say is, I don't know, somehow discounted or tainted. So I try to choose when to disclose, when to use my chair, when to walk.
Yeah, I often think about the interactions with the strangers in the world is often where it comes up for me, or I notice it the most, is that I kind of, like you said, kind of like try to head it off of like, I smile way more than I ever did before I became disabled. Of like, I'm just going to be smiley, and not because like I necessarily want to talk to you, but I don't want you to then immediately ask me like, what's wrong because I don't have a smile on my face. I'm not saying that everybody needs to go around with a smile on their face. That's definitely not what I'm saying. But for me, it's one way, or just to approach people of like, smile on, be like, comment on the weather, or comment on something, kind of make that small talk, so that very first interaction is not them asking me why I use a cane or what, some comment about my physical appearance. And I think that, again, kind of engaging people on your terms, then it gives you a little bit more of the, kind of helps balance out the power differential in the conversation. Do you feel like your coping has changed over time, and how you manage when people only see you as a disability or only hyper focus on your disability? And if so, kind of how has that changed over time?
I guess I'm a lot more comfortable with it now. So I often I'll make jokes about it. I'll make gallows humor. I'll just talk. Yeah, I'm a lot more comfortable with it. And so being relaxed and talking to people about it makes it easier, I think. Whereas in the beginning, I was just embarrassed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just embarrassed.
Yeah, I think there's some of that too. Like I feel like I know how to navigate the world better, and I think that like being more comfortable helps me help others be more comfortable. And I definitely feel like I have fewer of those interactions now, and I think it's probably because I'm using techniques to cut them off at the pass.
Yeah.
But I think we all just sort of learn over time.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that being friendly, being upfront, and just sort of addressing the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish there was a way to like help people have those skills early on, because I do think that there must be something that we put off when we aren't comfortable ourselves that then like invites those questions. Because I agree, I think those questions, they still happen. They happen far less frequently, as I'm now almost 10 years out, as they did early on. And I think it must be something about how we carry ourselves, and not to say that it's the individual's responsibility. I just wish there was a way for us to like harness this wisdom that comes with living with it over time to help people earlier on in the process cope with the barrage of questions and comments.
I think that's a really good point, and I think part of it is like, you're just learning how to navigate the world, and you kind of do need more help figuring out how to do it, but most people aren't equipped to help with that, and it makes it challenging.
You need help, but you definitely don't need the ableist commenters' help to do it.
I think I recall early on even asking somebody how long is it going to be before my whole life isn't my disability, because that was also my outlook. Every waking moment was some concern or work or doctors or whatever. My whole outlook was about my disability, and
Mhm.
so that's all I was,
Mhm.
right? And then over time, I got to have all different parts of my life.
But it takes time. And I
Forever.
think that's really, it's a hard reality, but it's true. It takes time.
Yeah, time doesn't heal it, but time gives you space to adjust and add more things back in. Like early on, after whatever type of onset of a disability, like there's a huge learning curve, there's an adjustment to living in a new body, and that gradually, again, like you can add more pieces in as you're medically stable, as things with other systems kind of get figured out. The final type of ableist microaggressions is this idea of kind of otherization. It's really kind of where people with disabilities are described as kind of like abnormal or kind of outside kind of the natural order of things. Is there an example of kind of some examples of otherization include people maybe staring at you or kind of suggesting that living with a disability wouldn't be worthwhile? Is there an example of an interaction, again, with anyone from strangers to medical professionals to coworkers to family or friends, that you felt either explicitly or kind of implicitly kind of really othered you in such a way that maybe felt like it wasn't welcome or didn't feel comfortable? And again, how did you respond?
Lots of fun examples there.
Okay.
You
want to start?
I've had a mother pull her child away from me on a like very, very wide sidewalk as if I was going to like run her child over. I've had family members after my accident offer to help me with assisted suicide. This is less dramatic, but I recently had an interaction with my doctor where I had some bacteria in my bladder that was just an everyday bacteria, but as someone with an indwelling catheter, it's something, I wanted to monitor, and she sent me a referral to the infectious disease clinic, and that felt just really bizarre, and also was not listening to or paying attention to the fact that I'm not a medical anomaly. So yeah, those are just 3 examples.
And I'm just curious, how do you cope when things like that come up? I mean, those are different examples, but like, how did you feel like you emotionally responded to this doctor doing something so absurd?
I had just found another doctor.
Okay, it's very practical.
Yeah, it just felt, I had tried talking with her and I wasn't feeling heard, and it didn't feel worth my time or energy. So I just went elsewhere. Yeah. And I didn't even really directly engage with her after that because it didn't feel like she was listening anyway. So.
And it sounds like you were able to just like, it didn't even like emotionally register. It was just like kind of practically go to the next step as opposed to dealing with this
It was
provider.
frustrating because particularly as a medical professional, I hoped that she would have done better and done some of her homework, but it also didn't feel like it was worth my time.
Yeah.
I hadn't known her very long, and she'd never done me any favors,
Yeah.
so I just moved on.
Yeah, I think there can be I think especially transitioning out of like inpatient rehab where someone has a physiatrist that is definitely knowledgeable about spinal cord injury and all the spinal cord injury medical care that can go on, and then transitioning into the community where you maybe have a medical provider that doesn't have that same level of expertise and doesn't do their own research, and then sounds like dismisses your lived experience and tries to supersede it. That is very frustrating.
Very.
And I'm glad that you found a provider that did.
Thank you.
Respond.
Me too. I was glad that I was able to.
Yes.
I don't really have a good response right now.
Sure. No, that's totally fair. I think of when I think about this idea of kind of the people stare at me piece is one of those things that I often think about especially when I work with folks that are still in the hospital or when I was in the hospital, like everybody is in some sort of newly adjusted space. So there's not like maybe people are staring, but they're also like, well, what? Maybe I need that piece of advice or that device because mine's not working. Can I have what they have? But then when you kind of leave and go out into the world, you're all of a sudden not surrounded by this bubble of people with similar acute adjustment, and all of a sudden like you're maybe the only person in the room with a disability, and how different that can feel in terms of just navigating of like, yes, people with disabilities are the largest minority group, and that then means as a minority group there's still plenty of places that you'll be in where you're the only person with a disability.
I do remember one of our, first field trips from the hospital. We were going to go to the aquarium, and we all got on the bus.
That's where I went.
Remember, like, getting on the bus on the field trip? And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to get on the bus. We're all going to get on the bus. All of us freaks, right? And then we're all going to get off the bus, and all this, like, gang of freaks is going to go through the aquarium. I mean, that's how I felt, like, just, just weeks or months out from injury. It felt so, again, like internalized otherism, like I am not normal, and now there's a whole bunch of us that are not normal, and we're going to go out in that aquarium with all those parents and their kids, and they're going to feel like we're not normal. So it was I remember that really massive feeling of otherization, and I don't know.
It's interesting because I grew up with a mom who used a wheelchair because she had multiple sclerosis. And I remember as a little girl really struggling with that because, you really want to feel normal growing up. And you don't feel normal when you're standing outside the women's room telling people they can't go in because your dad's helping your mom in the bathroom. But I also remember, like, even then, like, because I love my mom and I knew my mom wasn't weird or, just because she used a wheelchair. And so I remember, like, struggling with myself to, like, feel more comfortable because I didn't want to act uncomfortable around my mom, and I didn't want other people to act that way around her. And so I really remember struggling with that feeling then too. And I think it made it a little easier when I became a wheelchair user, but I really resonate with that.
Yeah, I really appreciate you being willing to share that example, Michelle, because I think there may be this false belief that, like, okay, you immediately become disabled and you're like, you get it. You're like, okay, this is my world. I'm going to figure this out. And it's like, no, it's like pretty steep learning curve for some of us more than others. Maybe if there are family members who use devices, it feels somewhat easier or maybe harder. And I think, like you said, that first trip out of like, oh, and maybe even at the time probably not recognizing like, oh, I've internalized society's belief about disability and this kind of idea that it's abnormal. But feeling so uncomfortable, and that it takes time and gradual exposure and being around other people can often help, and it can also feel super overwhelming at the start. We've talked a little bit about, but I want to make sure, are there other strategies that either of you have done to kind of overcome that internalized otherization or that kind of internalized, how to kind of deal with that I'm different, or how to cope with that that's maybe changed since early on?
Well, sometimes like I'll try to be really put together, like when I go to the doctor, because I've learned that there's some statistic about it. Doctors will, be more dismissive of people with disabilities. And it's like shocking because that's when you most need your doctor. And I'm sure it's, your dear physiatrist is not that person, but out in the world, so I'm going to try to like overcompensate to make sure like I'm a put together crip. Okay. So, I'm more than my disability. So please treat me this way. So I may dress differently. Right. When I really kind of just want to go in my sweats,
right?
Which maybe I would if I weren't disabled. So that'd be one example.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent example of. You're right. It's devastating the statistics around medical outcomes for folks with disabilities, and the things that are in our control, it's disappointing. And like the control is to like, how can I help minimize that? And if I put on, I'll put on real clothes, air quotes, real clothes, does that change? And we don't know, but kind of what are the things that are in our control to kind of help reduce that? Any thoughts or reflections?
I think one thing I've been noticing is that I choose my communities more selectively now. There are spaces that are where disability is not an uncomfortable reality, right? Where people are comfortable with the fact that most of us face disability at some time in our lives. And I find myself just choosing those spaces for recreation. We don't always get to choose, but, even with the doctor, it's like, it just doesn't feel worth it to force myself to engage in communities where I don't feel welcome. And so it's definitely been something I found myself doing.
Are there other strategies? I know one of the things that you and I talked about, Michelle, when we were on the phone was like things that have helped you cope to feel more normal. Are things like getting back to work or getting involved in things. I'm curious what strategies have helped you to kind of feel able to keep going with the life now, all of these changes that have existed that have had as a result of your spinal cord injury.
Well, I know like super early on, like I had small kids, so there was just no question. I was just going to get in there and do whatever it took because that's just what I was going to do. But I felt my internal, stance kind of change when I found a way that I could actually be valuable, where I felt valuable and felt valued. When I got to help, someone asked me to help with setting up a technology lab. And I was like, oh, okay, I work in tech and I know what it's like to have a disability. So sure, I could help set up an accessibility lab and I could marry my, two things that I've come to know. And I really got a lot of energy from that, knowing that someone found me useful. So finding some use in life really kind of turned me around. And had just that act of that, it was a doctor actually that asked me to get engaged, that act of that doctor saying, hey, I think you'd be really good at this, could you help us out with this? That made a big difference to me, big difference. So if I had that opportunity to do that with someone else, not in a way of charity, but really saying, hey, you're awesome at that. Can you help me? I would extend that because, I don't know, psychologically, it changed my life, I think.
Yeah, there's a term that got introduced by a rehab psychologist called insider professional perspective. And it's this idea that like you have the lived experience of disability. We all have the lived experience of disability. And we have this professional perspective. And it sounds like for you, that was marrying your tech experience of like being able to use both your lived experience with disability and in combination with your technical expertise was a really good fit for what they needed. And so again, finding ways to kind of, together combine those things so that they can, because it makes better work when we use our full selves to show up and create things. And for me, that, being able to return to graduate school was very motivating. And it was then finding, oh, wow, there needs to be more research in rehabilitation psychology because we just don't really think enough about people with disabilities. When I talked to both of you, you kind of both initially were like, ableism? Like, both were like fully on board with sexism, but like ableism, is that as much of a thing? And you're right, we just don't really think about it in our culture the same way because it's almost so pervasive, people don't even recognize it exists.
I think for me, one of the big turnaround points was when I stopped trying to pair what this body can do with what my old body used to be able to do. And so I think initially I was framing things as, well, let me get back to that life. And I think when I finally realized that I had created a different life, it was a big turning point for me, because I realized that this life is different, but it's just as good. And when I was trying to just recreate what I had, the life I had, it was just full of disappointment and frustration. And so that really released me to sort of enjoy my life more, and also to like see what I had accomplished and, you know, the opportunities that I had in front of me, which were different, but not, you know, better or worse.
Yeah, I think that's a really helpful perspective to kind of adopt. Of like, it is different, and I think that's a big piece, is to not deny that it's different, and there's still choices to be made about, you know, we can't change what's happened, but we can make different choices about where to go from here.
Yeah.
And then kind of just want to end before we open it up to maybe some questions of, again, kind of how you both choose to respond to those, what I call those frequently asked questions by the random strangers on the street, and kind of how, again, you kind of, that maybe that response has changed over the years, or how you have coped with that change or the response to dealing with it. I think the first one I imagine both of you get is, why are you using a wheelchair?
Or what happened to you?
Yeah.
A little less elegant.
Yeah. I just try to answer factually, and it depends how much. Sometimes it could be just like a joke and a quip, or it could be just, you know, 2 sentences, or it could be a paragraph, kind of depending on how I'm feeling and judging how sincere that person is, or
I think I have a similar response in that it depends on how I'm asked the question. Like when I'm feeling really snarky, I just tell them I broke my neck on a bicycle on Friday the 13th, which usually ends the conversation. But, you know, if it's someone who's like genuinely interested, or last summer I was doing a trail ride, and there was this adorable group of young girls riding their bicycles. And they stopped and said hi to me, and they were asking questions about my wheelchair. And then one of them asked how I ended up in a wheelchair. And she asked in a really nice way, and then that wasn't her first question. And so, you know, I spent some time to explain to them, and, it, you know, sometimes it feels worthwhile, but I think it really depends on how people ask the question.
Yeah, I think one of the things I have to joke is, like, if you spend like enough time with me, I will end up telling you everything. Just don't have it be your very first question, and eventually something will come up to where I need to explain it, but we don't need it to be the very first thing that you approach. I really like that example of with the little girls of like, do you have different approaches when it's little kids versus kind of like the oblivious adult that maybe asks the questions, and you kind of, it sounds like you do, of like kind of the tone or how you've engaged with them before, and it's not the very first thing. How about you?
Little kids, I find, are more like fascinated with the chair. How fast
They
can you go?
they love asking
it's
questions
got red
about the wheelchair.
wheels. And when my kids were little, you know, I was always, you know, sometimes I'd have 3 or 4 kids on me.
Sure.
You know, one on each knee, one on the back, and, you know, we would just be riding around, and that was, you know, so I found little kids, really, they love the chair.
Okay.
And they like to drive this little thing and honk the horn and, you know, all that. So, I found them easy.
Most little kids, I agree. They're curious. They want to play with the chair, and they think it's cool.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a little awkward if you're at a grocery store and someone's child is pointing at you and saying to their mom, "What happened to them?" That's always a little awkward, but generally kids.
Do you engage with the what happened to them comments, or do you just kind of wheel on by?
Sometimes I do, and if I do, I speak directly to the kid. I don't speak to the parent because I feel like the kid needs to know that I'm a full human being. And, again, I think it depends on tone and situation and my energy level, whether or not I feel like it. But sometimes I do.
Well, again, I appreciate both of you so much for being willing to participate in this. We'll take a chance to see if there are some questions from our Zoom audience. And so just give me a moment to check to see if anything has come in from the Zoom. Any takeaway suggestions for folks that are newly disabled, navigating the world that is ableist, to build up that kind of, what I like to think of it as like a rubber, of like, so the comments just kind of bounce off of them so they're not taking them on. Any suggestions that either of you feel like you have that you've developed as kind of over the years, or just thoughts that you have as we're reflecting?
One thing that I think definitely came out today, and I've been doing some thinking about myself, is just that internalized ableism. And I think before we can encounter ableism in others, we have to encounter it in ourselves, because it's kind of a matter of like forgiving ourselves and accepting ourselves. So I think that's a really good place to start, is just asking ourselves where we're not being fair to ourselves because of our own internal ableism, or where we're being really tough on ourselves.
So maybe where some of that, either that minimization might be happening, or some of that otherization that could be happening as a result of kind of your own feelings about it, is a helpful place to initially start.
Because, I think kind of the comment earlier, we were talking about how for all of us, it's become easier over time, and people react to us differently. I think part of that is self-acceptance. I think we do that not only in terms of disability, but in all sorts of ways. If someone's not comfortable with themselves, other people tend to act more uncomfortable around them. And so I think part of it is just really fully accepting who we are, and then I think it's easier for others around us to do that too.
So unfortunately, no magic, easy answer for folks with new disabilities.
Well, maybe not to try not to internalize it, because those questions people have, that's kind of about them, and they're curious, and maybe one day you'll want to answer. Maybe right now it's too painful. Maybe you don't have good answers, but over time, I guess I would say over time it does get better. And the time frames are long. Time frames are really long, especially when you're new and you think, I don't know, someone in rehab, I was doing my rehab, I don't know, Mancala or whatever, you try to do those little things with the beads, etc. And someone was talking to a patient, and it's like, oh yeah, I had an injury like 5 years ago, and like 5 years out, it's pretty good. I was like, 5 years? Are you kidding me? Yeah. So it seems so long, but over time it does get better. And but also to be aware that things like doctors' opinions or outcomes for people with disabilities, or being accepted at work, all those, in maintaining relationships, that just like statistically have different outcomes, and if you know about those, then you can not internalize it yourself, and maybe have different strategies for those.
Yeah, so kind of a theme of being aware that it's a thing, so that you, again, can recognize it's not about you, but it's about the culture that we live in, and try to make the choices that best help you navigate this world that is not always accessible. Someone understandably commented on finding humor is a huge piece, and I completely agree. That was one of the pieces that I really wanted from my dissertation, and I wasn't able to quite capture it, but that is an area of interest for me, because I think there's so much within the disability community around humor that is such a huge part about coping. The question I want to leave you the option to Shannon to not necessarily respond to this, but was just about kind of how you dealt with your family's comments around assisted suicide early on, because that is definitely something that gets brought up. And I also know that suicide's a sensitive topic and not everyone feels comfortable talking about it. So it was a question that was posed, and I leave it up to you to decide if you feel comfortable sharing or.
Yeah. I mean, I still think about that comment years later, and there's a lot of ableism in my family, despite the fact that my mom was a wheelchair user, and I've really seen it since my accident. You know, comments like, "Oh, we thought your life was over, and now look what you've achieved." Or, I still get comments like that regularly. I think my skin's just gotten a little tougher over time.
Okay.
I know that the intention was to be kind and generous with that offer, and so I've tried to accept it in that way, but I've also tried to sort of subtly steer my family, like to educate them. I mean, to help them understand that, in fact, there are better ways to support me, and like supporting me and living my life is what I'm looking for. And sometimes I just tell them stories about other families that I think have done a better job.
Yeah.
Without necessarily saying that to them, and giving them examples of other people with spinal cord injuries and what they've accomplished. And I think over time that's helped break down some of their ableism. But, honestly, I think a lot of it is based in fear of what would happen to them, And I don't know about either of you, but, one of the comments I've gotten a lot is, well, I couldn't do that. I wouldn't be able to do that.
Yes.
And that also doesn't feel good, but I think the more evidence that we can provide of people living happy lives, the more we kind of break down those stereotypes. But it was a really hurtful comment, and it's not one that I will ever forget.
No, I imagine. Yeah, I don't know where you were at in your recovery when that movie came out.
Oh, which one?
Oh, I don't remember. Why am I bringing up movie titles when I'm not going to remember? But it was the one where he
Is it You Without Me?
I think so, or something like that. And it's he decides that he doesn't want to live, and so I just.
And then he leaves all of the money for her to go to college.
Yeah. And so I just feel like part of even our own family and our own internalizes like how media and pop culture presents disability. And so as this like life ending, there's no way you can like go on or do anything or live a happy life or even just a content life after disability. I'm not sure where you were at in your recovery when that movie came out of.
I did watch it and was very disappointed with the end.
Yeah, I bet.
Plus, this guy had everything.
Yeah, right? He had like every resource imaginable.
Yeah. I probably would have chosen to live and spend all his money. But.
Yeah, me too.
I appreciate the choice, though, that, part of, like, recognizing ableism and just also recognizing that we have the choice to interact with our disability as we choose. We don't always have to be in a good mood about it, and things are harder.
Yeah.
And, I wouldn't fault anyone for making that decision, but it's the default attitude that it's going to be so bad you're going to want to die that is really hurtful, I think. And it doesn't leave any room for finding joy in your own experience. And I think that's where it really, that's where I really criticize it.
Yeah, I agree. We have some people saying this has been a meaningful meeting because they have a wide range of functioning. They think it's difficult for people to understand how I can walk one day and be unable to even move a finger the next day. So it's nice to hear from someone who can walk at times and also feel like they're faking it. So thank you for sharing.
You are welcome in this forum.
Oh, yeah. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. You're helping make other people feel welcome. again, thank you both so much for being willing to do this. I think this is an important, hopefully, start of ongoing conversation around how to help folks throughout life after a spinal cord injury be able to again, interact with a world that is very ableist and navigate it. So thank you both for your willingness to share.
Thanks for bringing attention to it.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Yeah. Thank you all.